The Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and your local cable provider presents Cable Reports. Join us now as Cable Reports brings you up to date on current issues facing the Commonwealth through discussions with your local legislators and other policymakers from across Virginia.
Welcome from the General Assembly and the City of Richmond. I'm Woody Evans for Cable Reports and Cox Communications. And a very warm welcome to our guest today, Delegate David Bulova, representing the 37th District up in Northern Virginia, Fairfax County. Welcome, sir.
Good morning. Great to be here.
Tell us a little bit about what's going on in your district, its boundaries, and some of the issues that you're hearing.
Sure. It's right there in the heart of Fairfax, and includes the city of Fairfax, kind of on the eastern side, and down south includes George Mason University. We're very proud to have the university in my district and work closely with them. And then we stretch out to the west to include the Government Center, and then right out through the historic heart of Centerville on the western side. So you could almost call us the I-66 corridor district.
The I-66 corridor. A lot of transportation issues, I take it, up in Northern Virginia.
Absolutely, and you know, I'll tell you what, I actually commute the length of my district every day, and it's one of those frustrating things that on a quiet day you can get back and forth, you know, within about 15 minutes. On a bad day, it takes about an hour and a half to get from one end of the district to the other.
Now, you mentioned George Mason University, and there was a groundbreaking ceremony recently there. Talk to us about that.
Sure. This is a great project. It had a lot of community involvement, and I think that's what made it really special. For those familiar with the district, the interchange between Ox Road and Braddock is one of the worst in Fairfax County. And so George Mason actually came up with this idea that if they could reroute traffic that would be going to the university going east on Braddock Road, they could actually reduce traffic congestion in there and also get rid of a really big safety problem. There's an east and a west campus, and so in order to get from one side to the other, students have to cross Route 123, and that's enormously dangerous. We're just very blessed that nobody has been hurt or killed so far, and so that's where this campus connector idea was born. And so not only is it going to solve a transportation problem and reduce congestion, but it's also going to increase safety. And it really does get at the heart of, you know, why transportation funding is so important. You know, you think about some of these very large projects. You know, we've got a lot of work that we need to do with the I-66 corridor, but it also comes down to some of these very small projects that can make a huge difference in the quality of life of people in Fairfax and Fairfax City.
And of course, one of the governor's signature initiatives this year is transportation, where he proposes to, among other things, eliminate the 17.5-cent gas tax. What's been the reaction from your colleagues and your constituents about the governor's proposal? Right.
Well, it's been mixed, and I think on the good side, people are pleased that we're starting the conversation at a different point. The conversation's no longer whether there's a need for it or whether we ought to do it. The conversation has shifted to we have to do it. We got to make these investments if we want to maintain quality of life, if we want to continue attracting businesses to our area. And in fact, our national business rating has slipped because we haven't been able to maintain our roads and build new roads. At the same time, you've still got to do it right. And I'm concerned with some of the specifics of the governor's package, especially moving away from the gas tax, which is a classic user fee. And you know, in the same way that you pay for water or for sewer, when you buy gas and you're using the roads, you're helping to pay for transportation. You know, the other weakness is that the gas tax is probably one of the few taxes that really make sure that out-of-state residents pay their fair share. To the tune of about 30% of it being paid by out-of-state residents. And so getting rid of the gas tax doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Why would you treat gas different than any other commodity? That said, you know, I think we do have some paths forward. You know, the governor has come and talked to me, talked to members of my caucus, and asked for us to be open-minded. I think he's serious. I think he's sincere about that. And at the same time, I would hope that he would also stay open-minded that perhaps just eliminating the gas tax isn't necessarily the right way to go, and perhaps there's another way of going about it.
Now, what about the reliance on the sales tax in lieu of the gas tax? I take it that the thinking is that those non-residents will stop at our retail establishments and spend a lot of money, which will make up the difference by eliminating the gas tax.
Yeah, and I think I haven't seen the numbers, but I have a hard time believing that interstate traffic for a few cents is going to be any more or less predisposed to stop at one of our very fine gas stations along I-95 or I-81, and that because they're paying a couple cents less in gas, that means they're going to be buying a couple more ho-hos or ding-dongs or another soda. So I don't see quite how that makes up the difference. Another concern is that when you are reducing the gas tax, that's already built into your price, and so there's a lot of regional market forces that are out there that affect gasoline prices more than just that 17.5 cents. And so my fear is that we're going to raise the sales tax, which people will definitely feel, but they're not going to feel the full reduction of the gasoline tax. And so as consumers, we wind up paying more. And your gasoline companies, and they're more than welcome to do this as part of free market society. They're going to wind up taking up the difference, and we're not going to get anything out of it.
I suppose we already see that now at the North Carolina border, because as I understand it, there's very little difference between a gallon of gas there versus Virginia, and their gas tax is twice what the Commonwealth is.
Exactly the same phenomena, correct, yeah.
There are also some additional fees imposed. There's a $15 additional registration fee per year, and there's this $100 annual fee for people who use vehicles with alternative fuels. And you're an environmentalist. What's the puts and takes on that?
And I also drive a hybrid, as well as many of my constituents. The registration fee, again, there's different ways of raising money, but the thing that benefits Northern Virginia from that registration fee is it goes towards mass transit. And so Northern Virginia, Hampton Roads, and other places that have mass transit actually proportionally win out much more when you're dedicating that to a fund like transit. And so, especially for things like I-66 in my district, where you can't build your way out of the mess. We're going to need to extend Metro, or we're going to need to have bus rapid transit. That kind of funding is going to be absolutely critical. I agree with hybrids paying their fair share. We ultimately get in trouble if we're not putting money into the system and we're consuming less gas. What doesn't make any sense to me is why you would do that after eliminating the state share of the gas tax. That seems punitive to me. If you were keeping the gas tax, I could see why there might be an argument for that, but not if you're getting rid of the gas tax.
There's also been some criticism as a result of the $800 to $1 billion funds necessary for transportation. It's reliance on the repeal of a federal law that would allow taxing of internet sales. Apparently that bill has been languishing in Congress for over 10 years now, and the reliance on that may not be prudent.
Right. Yeah, a good chunk of the governor's proposal relies on federal action, which I think most of us here understand is not necessarily a given proposition. And so I'd rather Virginia step up to the plate and adequately fund our system, because my fear is that, okay, we'll move forward with this. It's not enough, even the package that the governor is proposing, to really cover the needs of Virginia when you're looking at both maintenance and transportation. But if the federal part doesn't come through, we've really underfunded our system. But there are going to be some people who will declare victory, and we're not going to be able to get through another package for another 10 or 15 years. And I hate to think what our transportation system is going to look like at that point.
Now, over the past several years, there have been a number of public-private partnerships, part of which was funded by the state borrowing at a time when interest rates are low and construction costs are a lot less expensive.
Right.
What's happening with some of those public-private partnerships in Northern Virginia?
Right. Well, the big one is the express lanes along the I-495 corridor, and I've used them, and it's definitely saved me some time. You know, keeping my fingers crossed that the business model works. You know, we rely on the private sector to kind of get it right with respect to whether they can make money building something like this, and that it will also be a good value to your consumers and your taxpayers. And that's the part that you know, I think we might need to revisit is, you know, certainly public-private partnerships, you can get new roads in the ground, but at the same time, there is still a large infusion of public dollars, and so you got to make sure that the primary issue isn't that somebody's going to be able to make money, somebody's going to have to make money, but that it's actually meeting a public need, and that's the most efficient way of meeting that public need.
Now, at the local level, in terms of transportation, is it important that localities have flexibility in terms of land use and zoning?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's important that they have flexibility in land use and zoning. It is also very important that they have the tools to ensure that that land use and zoning not only matches up with their transportation plans locally, but regionally. And that's actually something that I've worked on for a number of years. Part of my professional background is in regional planning. And one thing that I know is that transportation and congestion and water issues and health and human services issues, they don't stop at any jurisdictional lines. And so we do need to do a better job at coordinating, you know, whether that is, you know, the city of Fairfax and Fairfax County, or whether that's Fairfax County and Prince William and Loudoun and Arlington. But yeah, localities need to have that flexibility, and at the same time realize that they need to coordinate regionally in order to create problems from happening at jurisdictional boundaries.
Now, you mentioned earlier that the Commonwealth is known as having a business-friendly environment, but our stature has gone down over the past few years. Partially because of our transportation crisis here. Are you hearing from businesses about transportation needs?
Oh yeah, and I think you've gotten, I don't know if there's a business organization that hasn't weighed in one way or the other. And these businesses understand that they can't grow if they don't invest in their own businesses. It takes capital. It takes investments, and transportation is part of that investment. You know, I bet there are businesses that really wish that they could buy a piece of road and solve the problem for themselves, and yet it's one of those functions that you can't do on your own. We rely on government, and you know, that's why it's important that we go ahead and move forward for our businesses.
In terms of those of us who use the roadways and become distracted drivers, I know that you've been a leader in the push to create more safety in terms of texting while driving. Talk to us about the needs there and your legislation.
Sure. Well, distracted driving has really become an epidemic. If you go along almost any major road in the Commonwealth, you're going to see a large number of people who are paying less attention to the road and more attention to texting or reading something. And, you know, unfortunately, you know, it winds up costing lives. I think we had a very, very tragic situation in Fairfax County over the summer where a young man from going to college was by the side of the road. I think he was fixing his vehicle, and somebody had clear view, lots of time. There was no skid marks, but was texting and driving, and killed him instantly. And you've got stories like that all across the Commonwealth, and they're absolutely avoidable. And so this year I put in a specific bill that would at least make texting and driving a reckless driving offense. We do have a texting and driving law on the books. It's a secondary offense, which means you have to be doing something else to be caught. So you could be doing texting and driving right in front of a police officer, but as long as you're staying in a straight line, they can't pull you over, and that's not right. You know, that's like saying that if you've got a bottle of vodka in your hands, that a police officer wouldn't be able to pull you over. And so the other thing is that the fines are so low that the judge in the case of the individual that I was talking about said that he couldn't charge him with reckless driving because we hadn't taken the issue seriously. And so I think that has created a catalyst for some change this year. And I know myself, Delegate Klein, Delegate Surivel from Fairfax, and at least a dozen or so co-patrons of this legislation are really hopeful to be able to push that through.
So where does that legislation stand now?
That legislation stands in the Courts of Justice Committee, and that's had some very rigorous debate, but I think that there was round agreement that something needed to be done. It's just that courts of justice, rightly so, focuses on the details,
right.
No unintended consequences, and that's what they're doing.
You've also been a leader in the human trafficking arena last year and continuing this year. What's going on this year that's important in terms of at least alleviating the problems associated with human trafficking?
Right. Well, a lot of people don't realize that Virginia is a hot spot for human trafficking. I mean, who would think? But we have a high immigrant population, we have Dulles, we have the Port of Hampton Roads, and we have a lot of interstate traffic going through. And so unfortunately, of all the states, I think Virginia was number 10 in terms of complaints for human trafficking, which is something that I think we all want to see go away. We've worked over the last couple of years to increase the penalties for human trafficking, and yet the problem is that we were having trouble getting people to even report that these were going on. The victims are usually under duress, and for those who might be witnessing human trafficking, they might not know that they're witnessing it, or they might not know who to call. And so last year I put in a bill that would require that the human trafficking hotline be posted at certain establishments where human trafficking has known to have taken place. That passed, and that was something I was grateful to have the governor's support and the attorney general's support, and it passed because it was effective in Texas and other states in getting more people to actually call in these crimes. And so this year, again working with the attorney general's office, and the governor actually approached me to carry the bill, is to expand where these hotline postings would take place.
And where would they take place under your legislation?
Well, under the legislation, it would be truck stops are one of the big places, and this is not to say that truck stops are truck stop owners are the problem, but unfortunately truck stops are used for this kind of illegal activity, and so we want to make sure they have the tools so that people can alert the police if things are going on.
Now, it sounds like there's a significant educational need in terms of making citizens of the Commonwealth aware of this problem. Is there anywhere people can go to get more information about this issue?
Sure. I don't have the website, but if you go to if you Google the Polaris Project, they are a fantastic organization. Also, the Richmond Justice Initiative are two organizations where you get more information.
What about water quality control? I know there's some incentives that you are pursuing in order to alleviate the issues around our water quality in the Commonwealth.
Right. Water quality is going to be a big issue over the next couple of years. The EPA has essentially mandated Virginia and Maryland and Pennsylvania to clean up the Chesapeake Bay over the next 15 years, and it took 400 years to mess it up, and to clean it up in 15 years, that's going to be a challenge. It's also going to be expensive, and a lot of that burden is going to fall onto our localities. Bill that I'm putting in this year would create a cost share program to help be more efficient about the way that we go back into communities, because most communities were built oftentimes with flooding in mind, but not water quality. And so, even my community, Middle Ridge, doesn't control for water quality. So you need to go back in there and retrofit those areas, but you need to do it efficiently. And so the bill that I have put in is a cost share program where the state or a locality can go to a private property owner and say, hey, we know that you don't have to do this, but if we are willing to put in some of that cost, would you be willing to be a good steward of the environment and put in some money to help control all the runoff or the pollution coming from your parking lot or from your rooftop? It's been a very successful program with farmers. Most people want to do the right thing. They just can't afford the whole thing themselves, and that's actually coming up this morning in committee.
Okay, good. Now, over the past several years, there has been a lot of concern about our training centers, that house some of our challenged population. Some of them who have been there for quite a while and are now adults.
Right.
And I take it there was a settlement with the Department of Justice concerning a lawsuit they brought. But I know you have a budget amendment in dealing with the Northern Virginia Training Center. What is that all about?
Yeah. Well, the Department of Justice, their focus on Virginia was the fact that we had such a long waiting list for those looking for community services, so people who were, had disabilities, who were still living out in the community but couldn't get the supports that they needed. And we had a waiting list of several thousand long, which is absolutely unacceptable. And I think all of us understood that that was unacceptable. Department of Justice finally came in and said, you got to do something about it. And so that was the focus. The plan that the administration came out with, though, shifted all of our resources to the community, with the plan to close all but one of our training centers, the Northern Virginia Training Center being right there on Braddock Road. The problem with that is that at the training center you have the very most medically fragile, and as you said, you have individuals who have lived there pretty much their entire lives. And so the Department of Justice, in their settlement, I don't think they were looking to take away options. I think they were looking to expand options. And so, there are a lot of people who don't want to move out of that training center, and we're looking for possibly a better way to do this rather than just simply close them. Is there a way that we can redevelop or rehash it so that it's providing overall community services? And so that's what we're trying to do. The other part is the oversight aspect. And when you're taking folks from the training center and putting them out into the community, you got to make sure that they're at least having as good a service, if not better, than what they would have gotten in the training center. Otherwise, we haven't accomplished a darn thing with the Department of Justice ruling. But that also takes time, it takes people, it takes money, and our local community services boards were actually the one to raise the red flag and say, hey, if you were to close the training center, we don't think we have the resources out in the community to support them. And so we took that very, very seriously. And so the bill that I have really just says, let's slow this down. No arbitrary deadline for closing something. What we ought to be looking at is, are we ready to close it, or should we close it, or is there a different way of going about it?
And what's the status of that measure?
The budget amendment's been introduced. I know several groups are out there lobbying on its behalf, and it will eventually get heard before an appropriations subcommittee, but it hasn't yet. Great.
Now, the other initiative that you're actively involved in is education.
Right,
and of course, the governor has a package of tools that he wants to use to improve educational quality in the Commonwealth. Talk to us about some of the things you are carrying.
Sure. And education, that's near and dear to me. I've got 2 kids in high school and 1 4-year-old who's about to enter the school system for the very first time, and also feel very blessed that I'm on the education committee, so I get to actually work on those issues. A lot of the governor's package I support, and it deals with providing schools with the flexibility to innovate at the local level. And to the degree that we agree on that, I'm very happy to support making sure that our schools can do that. And that's one of the bills that I'm carrying this year. There's been a big push for charter schools in order to innovate. In my mind, it shouldn't matter so much what kind of school you're talking about, virtual school or charter school. What you're really getting at is how do you empower our local schools to think creatively. And so charter schools in their application can actually request waivers from different kind of regulations so that they have that flexibility to think about that. And what my bill would say is, okay, if the Board of Education grants that flexibility to a charter school, and it works, that charter school is thriving, that local school board ought to be able to take that same waiver and apply it to other schools in the district. Why create an artificial distinction between a charter school and everybody else? If it's a good idea, it's a good idea, and you ought to be able to apply that across the board.
There's some other elements of the governor's package dealing with an increase in teacher pay, but also a reform of for lack of a better term, tenure, if you will. And apparently there's been some agreement reached on that. Do you have any details?
Yeah, the governor's office and the VEA worked very, very closely on that, and they did come up with a compromise. The tenure issue is, when are you eligible for continuing contract? Right now it's kind of 3 years, as long as you've done a good job for 3 years and you don't have to worry about each year getting your contract renewed. The compromise was you stuck to that 3 years as the mandatory, but a locality or a local school board could extend that to 5 years, and the VEA seemed to be satisfied with how that panned out.
What about early childhood education? How critical is that? I keep hearing that if a child can't read by the 3rd grade, it's a predictor of a lot of different things, including the need to build more prisons.
Sure. Absolutely. In early childhood education, you know, that's pre-K and before. And, you know, I've watched my own 4-year-old, you know, being in a good preschool, how much more he's able to comprehend and starting to read. And we are struggling. We do have schools in Virginia, you know, that get to the 3rd grade SOLs for math and reading.
Standards of learning.
Standards of learning, and they're not passing. And so, you know, I hate to use a cliche, but reading is fundamental. And in fact, if you aren't going to be reading it, if you're not reading at a certain level, it affects everything else. So social studies, science. And so part of what we're doing in the Education Committee is ensuring that not only are you catching students at that level, you know, to make sure that you understand that they can't read, but then also taking the time to remediate them, particularly in reading, before they move on. But like you mentioned, you know, where to really focus on that process is good pre-K, and that hasn't gotten as much attention, I think, as it really needs to. You know, once you enter school, you've got a short window between, you know, kindergarten and 3rd grade. A lot of that brain development happens long before you ever enter school, and so you need to be able to arm parents, you know, so that they come into school basically learning ready.
Absolutely. One other important issue facing the Commonwealth is Medicaid expansion. Where is that, and how do you see that playing out? Right.
Well, at least at this point, the governor has said that Virginia is not going to participate in the Medicaid expansion. I'm hopeful the way he phrased that, which is he still has questions. You know, they want to have certain flexibility or waivers, keeps the door open to Virginia participating in that. And really, there's 2 reasons. You know, I think it's, first of all, the right thing to do. You know, you're expanding coverage to about 400,000 people who wouldn't have coverage otherwise. But I think it's the fiscally responsible thing to do. You know, it will cost Virginia a little bit of money to participate in this program ultimately. It's 100% paid by the federal government for the first 3 years, and then all we pay in perpetuity is 10%. You don't get a much better deal than that. But we're making up for it. You know, people who pay premiums on insurance are paying up for that in higher premiums because anybody who doesn't get preventative care, who ultimately comes in and has to use emergency services, that all gets reflected in the cost of doing business because they're not paying into that system. So it's much better, yeah.
Great. We've got about 30 seconds left. I wanted to make sure that people are aware of your constituent day. Is that February 18th?
February 18th. One of the things that I love the most is when constituents can come down and be part of our democratic process. And so this year on February 18th, we're inviting people to come in and we'll show you around the Capitol and you can watch a floor session.
Thanks for being here, Delegate David Bulova. Thank you for watching Cable Reports, brought to you by the Virginia Cable Telecommunications Association and Cox Communications. Until next time, I'm Woody Evans.